Peterhof, the world-famous palace with its fountains, a masterpiece of Russian culture, was founded early in the 18th century by the Tsar reformer Peter the Great. It lies on the southern shores of the Gulf of Finland, 29 kilometers from St. Petersburg. According to tradition, it was the Tsar's future wife, Catherine, who inspired him to build a place of rest on these precarious shores. She often accompanied Peter on his hazardous sea travels from St. Petersburg to the fort at Kronstadt, which was then being built. She longed for a comfortable home where they could wait for bad weather to clear, and also somewhere they could escape to, away from affairs of state. The emperor himself chose the site where this, the first country palace, would be built. A terrace of granite boulders was constructed on the shore, and on this terrace they began to build a palace. This single-story house, in the Dutch style, was called Montplaisir. Peter gained great pleasure from the views of the sea, the sound of the waves continually lapping on the shore, and this became his favorite place for both work and relaxation. Even when the great palace had been built, Peter still preferred Montplaisir. It was here that he found those brief moments of solitude which inspired him with new ideas about the transformation of Russia. The main part of the house, the living quarters, was completed in 1717. The galleries were added later. The rooms and paintings at Montplaisir reflect Peter the Great's love of the sea. We can see here works by Dutch and Flemish artists of the 17th and 18th centuries, which Peter himself collected during his travels in Holland. This was the first picture gallery in Russia. The State Hall is the most impressive of all the interiors at Montplaisir. Its huge vaulted ceiling is decorated with a magnificent fresco, the center of which portrays Apollo, the god of arts and poetry. At the edges of the fresco, we see the four elements: water, air, fire, and earth. At the corners of the fresco are pairs of sculpted figures personifying the four seasons. True artistic masterpieces. Both ceremonial receptions and state meetings were held here in the State Hall. Peter truly loved this palace. It perfectly fitted his ideal of the home of an educated man. It is here that the Tsar's personal taste is most clearly reflected. His private chambers are defined by a practical, almost business-like appearance, combined with a dignified asceticism. The rooms were designed in such a way that Peter could look out of the windows and see the ships traveling to and from his capital city and the west. Small receptions and tea parties were held at Montplaisir, at which Catherine was able to demonstrate her culinary skills. Artifacts and utensils from that time have been preserved here. The rooms at Montplaisir are decorated with tiles, wood carvings, ornamental mouldings, sculptures and paintings. The lacquered study most resembles a richly embellished oriental casket. Its walls are adorned with black lacquered panels with figures depicted in gold relief. Similar rooms were created in other European royal residences during the 17th and 18th centuries. A small garden with flower beds and magnificent fountains was developed on the south side of Montplaisir. Peter's handwritten notes and sketches, preserved in the plans for Peterhof, show that he himself designed this garden. Exotic trees and shrubs were planted. From the outside, Montplaisir bears little resemblance to a luxurious palace. However, it was the starting point for one of the most beautiful places on earth, Peterhof. The victory of the Russian army in the Northern War and St. Petersburg's elevation in 1712 to the status of capital city inspired Peter to create at Peterhof a country residence which, in its opulence and luxury, would equal the greatest residences of other European monarchs. Johann Braunstein, Jean-Baptiste Leblanc, and Nicolas Michetti were the chief architects of the Tsar's designs. The landscape architects were Garnchfeld and Borisov. The sculptors, Rastrelli and Pina. 5,000 serfs were brought here to the marshy banks of the Baltic to prepare the ground for building. Peter spared no expense on Peterhof. Beautiful statues and paintings, luxury building materials, and equipment for the fountains were all imported from abroad. Thousands of limes, oaks, and shrubs were planted. Peter's custom was to travel to his beloved Peterhof only by sea. To make this journey even more comfortable, he ordered that a canal be cut, leading from the sea to the foot of the palace hill. This hill was to be decorated with fountains. The architect Leblanc designed a large grotto to be cut into the hillside with 2 cascades tumbling down its slope. This design has been preserved to the present day. The Baratini brothers, experts of fountain design, planned the complicated system of water pipes needed to supply the cascades. The huge stone grotto, cut into the hillside, has dark, damp corridors which lead right into the foundations of the palace. Running through these corridors are pipes which feed water to the cascades. There is not one single pumping station used here. Water flows according to the pull of gravity, and the fountains work on a principle of interconnected pipes. This grotto is just one part of a unique water system created by the Russian hydro engineer Vasily Tuvolkov, which is based on the principles of natural water currents. This system of water supply, with all its canals and pools, has been perfected over 2 centuries, but the principles on which it's based remain unchanged. The grotto is part of the most important fountain display at Peterhof, the giant cascade. The walls of the grotto are covered with slipper stone and a huge variety of different shells. Antique gilt statues are positioned in the caverns of the lower grotto. For Peter's amusement, a special sprinkling table and water organ were also installed here. The giant cascade is the grandest, most impressive fountain display at Peterhof. This dazzling monument to the Baroque style, although altered and developed over the course of 100 years, still, in essence, remains the creation of Peter the Great. The Italian architect, Niccolo Michetti, who perfectly understood the Tsar's plans, enlarged the terraces, decorated them with sculptures, and adorned the balustrades with bas-relief. The giant cascade now boasts 64 fountains and more than 200 statues and decorative details. The focal point of the whole ensemble is a statue of Samson rending the jaws of a lion, which towers up from a massive pedestal at the center of the giant cascade. This statue was erected as a monument to the victory of the Russian army over the Swedes in 1709 during the Northern War. All the festivals and celebrations held in the park were centered here round the giant cascade. In 1717, as a result of his visit to the palace of the French king at Marly-le-Roi on the outskirts of Paris, Peter began to build a new palace at Peterhof, the Iliinский complex. This consists of a small two-story palace surrounded by ponds and the Golden Hill Cascade. This fountain was designed by Niccolo Michetti and executed by the Russian architect Mikhail Zemstov. The Marly Palace at Peterhof has little in common with its French namesake. Peter, in fact, borrowed only the name. The palace at Peterhof was built according to his own ideas and wishes, and the result is a modest, comfortable home intended for the Tsar's few moments of peace and solitude. Peter I's personal belongings, his books, furniture, pots and pans have all been preserved here at Marly. In the wardrobe you can even see his caftan with its embroidery of St. Andrew the First Named and his naval dress uniform. The decoration of the palace is comparatively modest. Only Peter's bedroom, decorated with fabric, and two of the offices could be described as elegant. These offices house the collection of Peter's personal belongings. Marly is the most modest of the palaces in the lower park. It has no ceremonial or state hall, and all the rooms are characterized by a simple, domestic appearance. Originally, the palace served as a guest house for visiting dignitaries, and was later turned into a museum. Paintings provide the major decorative theme to the rooms. They were collected by Peter himself in Holland and at one time covered the walls of the upper hall, dining and living rooms, to which they lent a certain domesticity. Kitchens, chefs prepared dishes from carp and other fish freshly caught in the palace ponds. Today, the ponds have a purely decorative function. Pavilion, which like Montplaisir stands right on the shore of the Gulf, was also intended for the Tsar's moments of seclusion. On the first floor is just one room, a dining hall with large windows. In the center of this room stands an unusual table, the center of which, operated by a special pulley mechanism, can be raised and lowered to and from the ground floor. If a guest wished to sample a new dish of food, he simply placed his order on a plate at the center of the table, which was then lowered to the kitchens, and his order was sent back up to him. In this way, guests were able to dine free from the unwelcome intrusion of servants. Guests were hoisted up to the first floor in a pulley chair in order to enjoy the literary evenings and musical entertainments which were held here. In 1797, nearly three-quarters of a century after Peter's death, while Emperor Paul I was entertaining guests here, the pulley chair broke and everyone was stranded on the first floor. Paul ordered the chair to be removed and replaced with a staircase. The Hermitage is one of the most perfect examples of Russian architecture, distinguished by a faultless lightness and elegance of form. In the eastern section of the park, we can see the Chessboard Hill or Dragon Cascade. The entrance to the grotto is guarded by dragons with water rather than fire streaming from their mouths. Chessboard Hill and the Roman fountains provide one of the most wonderful views at Peterhof. Peter, a great lover of practical jokes, ordered that surprise fountains be placed throughout the park. Artificial trees with leaves that spray water. Flowers and giant mushrooms that spurt the unsuspecting passerby with water, and the comic fountain known as the Sun. In August 1723, Peter staged the ceremonial opening of Peterhof without waiting for the building work to be completed. In fact, this work continued for a further 200 years. Peter the Great died in 1725, not living to see the completion of his beloved creation. During the years of his reign, Peter transformed his country and turned Russia firmly towards Europe. St. Petersburg, his new capital city, and this, his triumphal residence on the shores of the Finnish Gulf, became symbols of a new and flourishing Russia. Peter's reforms touched upon every sphere of society and politics. He was, without doubt, the greatest Tsar to have ruled in Russia. When Peter's daughter Elizabeth came to power, she considered it vital to continue her father's work. In 1740, she began reconstruction of the great palace of Peterhof. She employed her favorite court architect, Bartolomeo Rastrelli, whose plans returned to Peterhof its former status of the grandest, most important country residence. Elizabeth gave the master complete artistic freedom to develop and express his great talent. The lead statues herald the beginning of his work at Peterhof. The work carried out by Rastrelli on the palaces at Peterhof carries an echo of the architecture of Paris and Vienna, although it is anything but typically European. There is here an elusive Russian quality at play, an intimation of Russia's great spirit and wealth. By combining the ideas of Elizabeth with his own supreme talent, Rastrelli created a new architectural style for 18th century Russia, a style celebrated for its reflection of the fantastic realm in which Elizabeth reigned, a style which came to be known as Elizabethan Rococo. Rastrelli altered the palace interiors, decorating them with intricate carvings and delicate tracery in both wood and metal. He whitewashed the walls and then repainted them using bold, dazzling colors. Elizabeth was an attractive, pleasure-loving, even frivolous woman. In her youth, she adored playing games, attending dances and balls, and loved horse riding. In old age, she developed a great pleasure for eating. Rastrelli provided her with the ideal environment in which to pursue her pleasures, an opulent palace in which luxury and wealth replaced the restrained formality inherited from her father. Here in the hall, the innumerable mirrors reflecting the glow of the lights between the huge windows create a sense of limitless space. These same gold-framed mirrors once reflected the luxurious banquets and masquerades held by Elizabeth in this hall. The dancing hall, or as it was known, the merchant's hall, lures the visitor into a world of carefree amusement. A giant fresco, the Parnassus composition, adorns the ceiling, its figures proclaiming the Empress as patron of the arts in Russia. Everything here, the brilliant colors, the mirrors, the gold statues and tracery, create a festive symphony of light and color. Elizabeth died in 1761, the victim of her overindulgence in food and high living. It's said that she left behind 15,000 dresses, many of which she had never worn. During Elizabeth's reign, Rastrelli created a hall of modes and graces, its walls covered with 320 portraits of the most beautiful women at court, painted by the Italian artist Rattari. Following Elizabeth's death, Rastrelli's life became rather more difficult. A further example of Rastrelli's great creativity to be seen here in the park is the Catherine Wing. It was built for Elizabeth, but named in honor of another Russian empress, Catherine the Great. Here on the shores of the Finnish Gulf in 1762, just 6 months after Elizabeth's death, her successor, the drunkard and petty tyrant Peter III, placed his young wife Catherine under arrest. Strange as it may seem, Peter was the first and only emperor to honor Rastrelli for his work. He awarded the architect the Order of St. Anne and afforded him the rank of General Major. These honors, however, served merely as an excuse for the architect's detractors to consign his name to oblivion, to talk of his work as the epitome of bad taste, and ultimately to redesign his palaces both externally and internally. The Catherine wing was also altered by the architect Giacomo Quarenghi, who adopted a more restrained classical style for its rooms. It was during the beautiful White Nights in 1762 that Catherine took her first steps on the path to fame and glory. She escaped from the Catherine wing and led a conspiracy which removed her hated husband from the throne. Several days passed before Peterhof greeted its former prisoner as the new Empress of Russia. With the accession of Catherine II to the throne, a time of dazzling change and development began for Russia, a period which was to continue the work started by her predecessor, Peter the Great. The Baroque style, with which Rastrelli's work achieved the apex of its development in Russia, was already losing its popularity during his lifetime. In place of the frothy luxury of Elizabethan Rococo, there now developed the calm, graceful lines of classicism. And the fantastic, opulent carvings of the early period were replaced by a more restrained decorative molding. It was during the reign of Catherine II that the great palace was enriched with collections of rare paintings and furniture established by the Empress herself. It is also thanks to Catherine that the unique Chinese style of decoration first appeared at Peterhof, the most perfect example of which is the study designed by Valin de la Monte. Catherine had a great interest in matters of philosophy, an interest which seems to be reflected in the redesigned and rebuilt rooms of the great palace. This work was carried out to the designs of Yuri Felton. The new interiors were richly decorated with great works of art. The greatest of all the collections is housed in the Chesma room, where the work of the German artist Hackett, celebrating the brilliant victory of the Russian fleet over the Turks in 1770, is displayed. Thanks to the will and determination of Russia's emperors, over a period of 200 years, there grew up here at Peterhof a unique complex of parks and palaces which has become the pride and delight of Russian culture.
Результатов исследований. История покажет, кто был прав, но мы, Романовы, уверены, что хороним